40%, let's call it, a third of those 20 million households are one-person households. And 39% of households are 2 to 3-person households. With a massive growth of smaller households, and to accommodate these, people are building these amaroom, and these are, in essence, we're seeing this densification within this township space. And despite this, we have a massive shortage of these kind of micro-rental units. Around these concentrations of micro-rental units, we find a proliferation of businesses. Like, I took the picture on the left there, that's a young lady who started a laundromat. Opposite her is about a 50 amaroom, and those people get their washing done there. Gyms like Ivory Park, and tacky cleaning, tattoos, and so on and so forth. One of the lessons around this is when we understand who are the people within certain environments, then we start recognizing what are the businesses that actually supply those people. The single households, they go and eat out. They go to the Gorda outlet or the Chicken Dust outlet and so on. They don't want to cook within those outlets. They don't want to do their laundry and so on and so forth. So understanding those dynamics of those spaces become very important. How's this for a stat? There are more houses worth 1.5 million rand in building materials only in the former rural homelands, not in the townships, just in the rural homelands, than the city of Cape Town, from Melkbosrand to Gordons Bay, plus Wellington, Stellenbosch, and Franschhoek added together. That's in building materials only. We have a massive building sector in the rural areas with almost 2 trillion rands worth of high-value real estate. If you go to any rural area, go to Puredichaba, go to Mkanduli, go to Pongola, go to Ulundi, go to Mokwase, you will find these incredible places being built. In fact, 26% of the black middle class, 1 million black individuals, live in rural areas. And rural towns are booming. Those same towns I mentioned are doing incredibly well, actually driven by this kind of economy. And this is from PPC Cement's latest financial statements. In South Africa, the formal construction sector faces big challenges. PPC has identified pockets of resilience in informal construction, demand rising in rural areas, driven by rural construction. One of the mistakes we make when we talk about the informal economy is we have an image in our heads. It's a little hole-in-the-wall spaza shop, or it's a hawker. Do we think of people building mansions like this, those informal builders? And there's a cement company telling you that the growth is not coming from the formal sector, it's coming from informal construction. And how is that informal construction paid for? Through lay-by, society. Most people confuse stokvels, like a stokvela, where Gogos by Groza, with society, which are more lending type outlets, and society are both saving and lending entities. Then what I call brick-by-brick home loans. Every month people go and buy some bricks or cement and so on. In fact, I make this joke, in the old days you had your bed raised up on paint tins or bricks because of the dogolosh. Today you raise it up because you have cement and tiles and everything stacked on there before you start building. And then remittances sent into those kind of spaces. And so we have a large number of these construction workers who paid informally, no formal finance in this building sector, and a large number of builders and building and related things, mattress makers. The number of mattress makers is quite startling in these places. People who are doing aluminium windows and doors. Aluminium windows, chrome gutters, pillars, or, that's what you see in these kind of places. That was in Khayelitsha, chrome, stainless steel gate, tiles. This guy on the left-hand side here, he's got Elliot, is in Orlando East, and he has a woodworking business where he cuts so PG Bison supplies these products, which are high-end wood products, and then they cut them up, they edge them, and then they give them to the guy like Elliot gives them to sells them to the woodworkers, who then go off and put in cupboards and stuff. The cupboard business and kitchen surfaces sector in the townships is booming. PG Bison, 42% of their business now comes from the township of high-end wood surfaces. Elliot over there started selling Bakigili, which is chocolate eclairs and chappies, and today has 30 million rands worth of equipment on his floor, all purchase cash, working in that space. So often we think there's no light industry in this space. We're just not looking for it in the right places. So when I say I'm involved in the township economy, people say spaza shops, and it drives me crazy. It's one of the big mistakes we have to think about. When we think about this space, we think about the breadth of this kind of space. Yes, there are spazas, 190 billion rand a year. About 70% of those are Somali, Ethiopian, Pakistani, and Bangladeshi, who pay 25 billion rand a year to South African households to rent those spaza shops because they don't own those properties. We have beauty. A fun fact. According to Hollard Marine, the most stolen imported product in South Africa's ports is wigs, hair extensions, massive growth in the beauty sector, 10 billion rand a year, taverns, 44,500 licensed taverns, 110 billion rand a year, and then Gasi, of course, the fast food sector, everything from chicken dust to Maudwana and everything in between, 90 billion rand a year. And of course, this beauty sector, the food sector is 100% South African. So when we have this perception that the informal economy is dominated by the foreign traders, the spaza sector is. The rest of them are not. We have a huge amount of vehicle ownership. 12 million vehicles on our roads, of which 9 million of them are uninsured and 9.5 million of them are unfinanced. Massive growth of personal vehicles, and we have about 80,000 auto traders, Gasi mechanics, panel beaters servicing that space, and increasingly taking advantage of things like the e-hailing sector, providing servicing into that place. There's a recent law made called the right to repair, where anyone, you don't have to take your Ford to a Ford and your BMW to a BMW, as long as that mechanic can provide original parts, they can service it. This represents a massive opportunity of growing that sector. And just to point to the growth of personal car ownership, Leratong Mall, which is being built in the West Rand, 50 fashion retailers, 14 quick service restaurants, including 3 sit-downs and 3 drive-thrus. This development is a remarkable shift from the past, says Jason McCormick, who's the CEO. Car ownership in townships was too low to support such formats. Now car ownership is changing the way we design shopping centers. All of those vehicles purchase cash, not financed. We have a huge bakkie brigade, whether they're in the building sector, outside the fruit and veg markets, outside wholesalers, and it's a growing sector where you, in essence, it's like an Uberized system. You walk out of the market with your cabbages or potatoes, and then you go up to a bakkie, you negotiate a deal, and then they take you back to where you're going to resell those. But it's not only in those sectors, there's many others. My friend Bulelani Balabala from the Township Entrepreneurs Alliance, he should actually be here. He wrote, he's called Mr. Get Things Done. He works with, I think, about 100,000 township entrepreneurs. And he was talking about Sipho in Orange Farm, who started cleaning bills. Today, Sipho started his own bin cleaning service. Today he works 1 day a week and earns 14,000 rand a month by cleaning bins in his community. The biggest tragedy is Sipho started trying to get the other youth in his township to come and join him and start their own little businesses, and they said, we don't want to clean bills, that's not a job for us. And so we looked wrongly at also what is a job and so on. So this is a great book, The Chaos Precinct. It's a great title. By Tanya Zak, about the inner city of Johannesburg, the Ethiopian Quarter. And we have Little Mogadishu, which is Mayfair. And so the informal sector is not only in townships and rural areas, it's also in inner cities. And in the research they did, cross-border shoppers were spending 10 billion rand a year in Joburg CBD 10 years ago. Can you imagine the scale of that? The annual profit in 53 blocks, 3,000 shops amount to close to 7 billion rand profit a year, 10 years ago. So when we look at informal sector, are we considering these kind of spaces as well? So I don't have time to go through it today, but if you take a mirror to the formal economy, you'll find every business represented in the informal economy. By my numbers, that informal economy is worth R1 trillion a year, which you put in perspective is larger than the agriculture and mining sectors added together. And that's just on figures I have access to. These aren't my figures, these are from various sources. But it includes the taxi sector we know and love, 50 billion rand a year. 18 billion rand in the muti sector. Even goat sales in rural KZN, 3 billion rand a year. A very big sector. And people challenge me, they say, R1 trillion, it's impossible. In fact, the only person who the other day, I've got a new book called Gastronomics Unleashed, and one of the heads of a taxi financing business, a listed taxi financing business, read my book, and in it I said the taxi sector is worth 50 billion rand across 250,000 taxis. He said, Gigi, you underestimate that. It's probably 3 times that size. So, but this was work done by Finscope, MSME survey in South Africa in 2024. They say the informal economy is worth 2.3 trillion rand a year. So choose a number between 1 and 2.3 trillion. So I'm going to flip through this. So where's the money? So as I said earlier, I'm involved in business. I don't do research. I don't understand research. I don't understand many of those formulas. But I'm not the only one who is seeing a massive growth of this informal economy. And we should have a couple more CEOs here. And this was an article in August 25, South Africa's informal economy becoming a giant. Well worth looking at. But I just want to quote a couple of people, Exemplar, who have shopping centers in rural and rural areas and townships. The most striking turnover at grocery anchors and fashion retailers outpaced inflation for years. The most striking trend is spend on fast food and fashion growing 4 to 5 times the inflation rate in township malls, buoyed by money made in the informal sector. And he attributes the company's success to the vitality of the informal economy. Vugile Property Fund, Itumeleng saying, township and rural retail portfolios outperformed urban and inner city commuter portfolios over the past 5 years. Township economy expanding faster than other segments. Township mall owner Dibula, informal economy holds its own. Nedbank, SA portfolio outperformed in townships in every metric. I can go on. Gerry Fourie, ex-CEO of Capitec, economy stronger in the informal market than anyone anticipates. TFG, the Fashini Group, massive informal economy and a lot of it's cash. That's not me talking. These are guys in their financial statements. That is where the money is. And how is that possible that township shopping centers and rural township shopping centers are 2 to 3 times higher what they call trading densities, turnover per square meter than inner city ones if we did not have a massive informal economy? And I'm just going to wrap up to talk a little bit about unemployment. This lady over here, I was at a school in Tembisa and I was chatting to her and I said, how long have you been selling here? She sells snacks and sweets and food to school kids. She said, 26 years. I'm like, 26 years selling from that bucket and plank. She said, I have put 2 children through university selling from here, and my husband has been unemployed the entire time. And for 26 years, she has been selling from there. And I said to her, is this a job? She said, Ngiyasebenza anginamsebenzi, which is a play on words. I work, but I do not have work, because a job is defined as a payslip. We do not have a payslip, we do not measure it as work. And in fact, put her in perspective. There are 25,000 government schools in South Africa, of which 12,000 of those are in townships or rural areas. And every single township and rural school, as almost all of you here will know, has between 3 and 5 school mamas in those schoolyards selling snacks and sweets and so on and so forth. Just imagine the size of that. That's a 3 billion rand a year sector, just in school mamas sitting there. So on the right-hand side here, this is in Khayelitsha. This lady over here, we went to visit her with the guys from ShopRite Financial Services, and we're trying to understand bank accounts. We said to her, she's got 6 back rooms, 3 at the top and 3 at the bottom. She rents out for 3,000 Rand each. We said, do you bank that money? She says, I used to bank the money, but she says, then the government saw it and stopped paying me my social grant. So now I get the money in my bank account, is my social grant in my bank account, and I get my rental cash. And we said, well, why do you think that's right? She said, every single month for 10 years, I took part of that money, I went and lay-byed building materials and slowly built up that building. And she said, at the end of 10 years, I have this. Isn't that what we should be doing with our social grant? And actually, we should be helping us. The government should be encouraging us to use it like this, not stopping us paying that. Now, you can say what you feel about that. But if you look at SA General Household Survey, according to SA General Household Survey, 23% of social grant recipient households say the social grant is their main or only form of income. And I saw this as a headline, shock and horror. 23% of households who receive a social grant say it's their only or main form of income. 77% are saying it is not the only form of income. 77% of social grant recipients are actually earning other forms of money outside of that. That's extraordinary. We're a nation of entrepreneurs and we should be celebrating that. But staying with social grants, Capitec's internal data for social grants. This is according to Gerrie Fourie. When you compare their social grant income against other income streams, the income is actually about 5 times higher. This is according to Capitec, who have 3 trillion data points, 25 million customers. And Gerrie says, I agree with Gigi, real unemployment or lack of an income. So remember, passive income is not a job. Those people earning rental incomes, are they saying when they're asked, yes, I've got another income, but I don't have a job? Among youth who are classified as unemployed and looking for work, 41% are earning up to 15,000 Rand a month, according to African Response Survey. The informal economy is not only massive, but it is not so informal. We must stop thinking of it as informal. And more importantly, we need to recognize it. We should be celebrating that economy. And when we recognize how big it is, we stop thinking about how to create more entrepreneurs or more informal economy businesses. We start thinking differently about how do we scale them up. Andrew is 100% right. There's no space in those spaces for more people, more entrepreneurs. We do not need more. We need to say, how do we, I talk about, it's not about startup, it's about how we can scale them up. And the more we scale them up, the more jobs they create, the bigger they become, the more sustainable they become, and the more established they become. And I ended one of my books with this. This is the next great frontier of Africa, the informal business sector. This informal world is inhabited by tribes of survivors, of gasipreneurs, of tabletop traders, hawkers and hustlers, gasikos restauratiers, spazaret superstores, and backroom rental barons. Go among them, give them respect. They are the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Andrew and Gigi on those fantastic presentations. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, we are live on Ubuntu Radio. So this conversation is broadcasted on Ubuntu Radio as we speak. We are going to open up for questions, but before that, I'm going to invite Professor Vimal to join us for our panel discussion. Let's welcome Professor Vimal as he comes up for our discussion. Gigi, I think you highlighted the vastness of the informal economy that exists, especially in Kasi, as you term it. If we're really serious about unlocking opportunities in those informal economies, what sort of interventions would we look at?
One of the first ones, probably just leave them alone. Because to a large extent, they get harassed by authorities. I would say there's many things, but so first of all, we should be creating policies around different sectors, because each sector is different, and what a room needs is different to a beauty salon, is different to a Kota outlet, and so on and so forth. So I think we need to look at that separately. I believe that there are probably 3 primary shifts that we can do. The first one for me is, how do we fix the infrastructure within the Gasi area so that there's electricity and not load reduction, that there's better water, better waste removal, and so on and so forth. The second one for me is about security of tenure, as in people invest in a business when they know that they are here, they can extend, they can build it up, and they can do whatever. And in many cases, most of businesses are in a street, in a taxi rank, in front of a house, in a back room behind a house, and people don't have title deeds and things like that. So how do we make sure that you feel that you own this place and that you have that security, you can invest in it, and more importantly, you can sell that business at any stage because you have this ability to sell the access to this point. And then the last one for me, and I wrote about this in my last book because I've really struggled with it. A lot of people talk about finance. I think finance is the least thing people need. The biggest thing is marketing. Is how do you can say there's a baker and then they say they want a bakkie so they can sell more, but they can get the finance for the bakkie, but now how do they create new markets? And they get the bakkie and then, now they struggle to find new markets. So marketing is about creating a brand, creating this, and most importantly, how do you sell and market your business to a greater audience? And I think that it's the most unexplored part of entrepreneurship is that marketing.
Andrew, Gigi speaks about building businesses that, can be resilient and at some point, thinking about selling those businesses. But you say in your survey, only 27 of those businesses that you looked at in 2020 survived, actually. Is it from a survivalist perspective that those businesses were started just to create a livelihood for themselves? Or are there other things that are influencing, the businesses actually surviving and actually becoming those businesses that can be sold on in future?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult question. So most people enter for survivalist reasons. They're unemployed, they haven't got opportunities. So entering the informal economy becomes an opportunity to make a little bit of income, to make ends meet, and over time, the opportunity might grow. But scaling is very difficult. And I think it's extremely important that we recognize that the failure of businesses to grow is not a South African unique problem. Across the world, most small businesses don't grow. And being a little bit honest about that is extremely helpful. Yes, you can survive in time, but it's very, very difficult to scale without access to networks, without access to capital, without strong institutions. And where I slightly disagree with Gigi is that informal institutions are strong. The reason that people feel happy to spend so much money in the traditional areas on housing is because they know that the traditional institutions will safeguard their investment. So the most important thing is not whether it's a formal institution or whether it's an informal, but is that institution stable? And a lot of the institutions that we see are unstable, whether they be formal because of the way the state polices, it closes down businesses. The state is very erratic. Most of the time it doesn't regulate, but then every now and again there will be an issue and then it'll jump in with both feet. At the same time, informal institutions are unpredictable. They can often be controlled by violent elements who impose tax. In the Western Cape, we see for everyone who builds a house, if you've got 10 rooms, you have to give 2 or 3 rooms within an extortionate payment every month. So that unstable institutional environment is going to hinder growth. So it's a complicated scenario, but I want to encourage people to get away from obsessed with growth. The key thing is, how do we create the environment in which people can sustain themselves, make a little bit of money, and if a better opportunity comes in a job or whatever the situation is, great. That's the most important thing. It's not that we want a business for the sake of a business.
And maybe, Prof, is that maybe something that we need to rethink? The fact that, we're waiting for better opportunities to come, or, what terms employment versus unemployment? Is that something that we probably need to rethink as a whole?
Yeah, I think, you've highlighted two different things. One is that it's not so clear, and both of them have said that it's not just like binary, informal, formal. There's like layers and complexities in the middle with scale, and sometimes very complex and niched organizations which would be competitive. It's just that they're not registering for whatever reasons. But the second thing you asked about, and was also talked about, is what happens thereafter? What's the continuation? You've got someone who's doing something now, and like that lady you showed who put her kids through college. What do they do after that? Is it that they're then entering a corporate sector or public sector? And so when you're thinking of, it's not just the moment in time survivalists, but it's also what are the empowerments that come with these activities. The other side of it, though, is that, but we don't know, we don't have data. Maybe you have better data, but we actually don't have the information to make clear, confident statements over the whole group, the whole population, actually.
And I think that's a question that was submitted on a Slido by Bonolo, and I guess to Gigi and Andrew. And she says, or he says, that as informal sectors don't often hand out receipts, how did you get the profits? By interviewing owners or by looking at what they buy from, the big wholesalers? How did you actually get the numbers?
So the numbers I showed there of the total thing come from different places. The spaza sector comes from a company called Trade Intelligence. The taxi sector I mentioned, it used to be Transaction Capital, now it's Mobilays. And there's a number of sources. The fast food sector is from a industry work done by the fast food sector, the formal fast food sector, trying to understand why they have such competition. So here's the thing, though. If you looked at one of the slides I missed there, if you look at a company like Shop to Shop or Kazang or Ikorka, they have these devices accepting card payments on spaza shop, beauty salon, tavern, Gorda outlets, counters. You can tap your card to pay, or you can tap and do what's called cashback. You can withdraw money out of the till. About 50% of transactions of those kind of companies are now card, so there's been a big shift towards card. Kazang, which is a listed entity, does 72 billion rand a year from about 140,000 devices. Company like Shop to Shop does about 3 billion rand a year. These are registered formal businesses. You can see in that data, 150,000 outlets, you can get the data, anonymize it if necessary, but if you look at the business sector, we have large amounts of data. And that data is there. Capitec is saying, and Capitec got into trouble for arguing with Stats SA. Gerrie said that they're wrong. He said, well, they researched 30,000 people. He says he's got 3 trillion data points and 25 million customers. He's got the data. He's showing there that social grant recipients on their figures, and I think they've got 3 million or more social grant recipients who've got bank accounts with them, which they receive the social grant into. They're saying they earn up to 5 times that in other things. Guys, the data exists. We're a highly formalized space in terms of payments. We have this data. I don't believe, with all due respect, that the business sector's information, data, and expertise in this space is data mined, and their expertise and understanding of this space is underutilized. We're talking about creating jobs, about building economies, then surely we should be talking to the business sector and exploring that kind of information further. That information is there. Not one of those figures up there can I not substantiate with some sort of source that is turning it over. And that's why I said, where's the money? Here's another example. The Joburg City market, fruit and veg market, turns over 10 billion rand a year. There are 18 municipal markets in the country, and the Joburg Fresh Produce one is the largest. 10 billion rand, of which, according to their figures, 60% are informal traders. You cannot go and buy your potatoes cash at a municipal market. You put your money onto a card and then you pay the agent using the card. That's data. 60% of their data, they have the card, they know how many traders they have, and so on and so forth. That's municipally owned data in essence. That's just one source of data. How many more are there? And so 6 billion rand in Joburg Fresh Produce Market is going through this informal economy.
We're going to open it up for our audience to take questions for our panelists. And do remember that we are live on Ubuntu Radio. That's www.ubunturadio.co.za and channel DSTV channel 888. So we're going to start here. We have a question here. And then we'll take about 3 or 4 questions for our panelists, and we'll proceed as that. Please go ahead. We can't hear you. Let's just sort out the mic. We do have a question that was also submitted on Slido, and I think also speaking to the informality of those businesses. And Spelele Kubisa says, unregistered and do not contribute tax. Do you think that the sector also places a fiscal burden on government while receiving the least direct benefits and support?
Yeah, okay, I'll have a stab at that. I think for many years, from a policy perspective, we've had a formalization obsession. We want businesses to be formalized, and so a huge amount of effort goes in trying to get the businesses to be formalized. And very often, immediately as businesses register themselves, they continue to conduct business in a highly informal way. So I think we need to rethink this emphasis on formalization, especially for the smaller firms that we are dealing with. In most of the case, these firms are providing indirect benefits to the economy through employment, through the procurement that Gigi has spoken about, and we have to look at them in that perspective, rather than trying to understand their turnover. And to go back to the previous question, I think it's incredibly difficult to really get a very accurate perspective of the profitability of a firm. We can look at proxy indicators, and I think Gigi has given some great examples. These are very helpful, but let's not get obsessed with whether, with the size of the business, particularly in the township context, and let's not get obsessed with formalization. I think formalization is really detracting from the business focusing its resources on building markets, strengthening networks, improving its product offering, ensuring that it has the kinds of value systems, entrepreneurial value systems, that are going to allow it to create the kind of networks and information exchanges that are critical to business survival.
Can I just add to that? Yes. About tax? So I have a chapter in my book called To Tax and Not to Tax, because it's the first thing everyone thinks. I think the first thing we've got to define is, what are we talking about tax? Rates and taxes, UIF, PAYE, fuel levy, VAT, profit, tax on business profits, tax on personal income, and so on and so forth. So we have to understand that. But if we just looked at that spaza sector, that's call it 200 billion rand a year sector, that the vast proportion of them pay VAT but do not claim VAT. That is an 80 billion rand a year rough calculation in net benefit to the fiscus. If you look at the taxi sector, they travel 50 billion kilometers or something like that, I've got the number somewhere, and use X amount of fuel a year. And they pay a fuel levy, I think it's 4 rand a litre or something like that, and that's about 3 billion rand a year. Then if you look at companies like, for instance, Unilever, RCL, Capitec, Tiger Brands, etc., that is McCormick, the shopping centres. They are massively profitable businesses that, by their own admission, would not be profitable if there wasn't a township and informal economy sustaining them. And they are paying very big, they're paying tax on their profits at scale. And so if this economy wasn't there, all of those companies would be paying a lot less tax to the fiscus as well. So we have to also look at downstream. We look at rates and taxes. 4 million site and service and RDP houses have been built since 1994 by the government. All of those should be paying rates and taxes, but they don't pay rates and taxes. That's a decision by municipalities, a political one. It's got nothing to do with a business not wanting to do that. So if we talk tax, let's look across the board and understand it in perspective, but we also understand the value add that is generated by businesses that may not be paying formal forms of tax, but there are many other benefits.
I'm hoping that our microphone is sorted. Yes, please go ahead. Keep it very short and sweet, please,
Okay,
ladies and
perfect.
gentlemen.
Thank you. My name is Gracious, and thank you for the insightful presentation. I have to say I also disagree with Prof on the size of the informal economy. I don't think we can talk about the informal economy without talking about immigrants and the township economy, which consists of a sizable portion of migrants, as you rightfully presented. And I think one of the panelists also mentioned the limitations of the QLFS in capturing township respondents, where you might find one respondent from Tembisa in a survey. And when I was using the needs data as well, I also struggled to find a sizable sample of African migrants. So if these traditional data sources cannot reflect the township and immigrant economy, do you think that using this data to inform labor market policies might produce systemic biases and misrepresent the reality on the ground? And should we be thinking about supplementing the traditional data sources with the carcinomics data to be able to come up with policies that better serve the population? Thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll take probably one from the back, and then we'll take 2 questions from the back as well, and then we'll come back to our panelists to respond to the questions. Please just state your name and tell us, please keep your question very short and sweet.
Thank you. I'm interested to hear from both the panelists, or all of the panelists, the issue around the lack of social protection for informal sector workers. In the research that HSRC has done, it's been a big issue of one day's work lost because of rain, because of other factors, ill health, etc., has serious implications. We've seen WeGo demonstrating that there are potential ways of addressing that, but clearly that isn't in our radar in our South African policy framework. I'd like to hear your views. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one or two more questions. I think we've got one there, and then we'll go to that table over there.
Thank you very much for the presentations. They were very succinct. Thanks. So I just have a question. So local government often regulates informal traders through a series of bylaws, zoning and licensing, which may hinder economic activity in the area. So now I just want to ask what evidence-based reforms could unlock better employment absorption in the informal sector without compromising public order or revenue. Thanks.
Thank you. And then we'll do one more question at that table. Yeah.
Thank you, Doc, for the insightful presentation. This goes to Dr. Andrew. From your presentation, lesson 2, you mentioned that reciprocity sustains survivalist businesses. However, I found a contradicting finding from my study, where in rural settings, I coined a concept that I called the Ubuntu credit default. This is wherein businesses within rural communities, they offer informal credit extension, wherein a non-payment leads to a reciprocity gap. Now, this leads to a liquidity crisis and working capital crisis for the businesses, of which it stagnates the enterprises now they are unable to create further employment and additional employment because of the non-payment. So what I do want to understand is that what is government doing to avoid the umbrella approach to policies, more especially when the ecosystems are not the same? So normally, for now, they proposing frameworks, but when you read those frameworks, you realize that it is an umbrella approach, but the ecosystems are totally different. The functionalities are also different. Thank you very much.
Andrew, your response?
If you look at, if you ask the question, where do people do business in a township economy? The answer is either that you trade from your home or you trade in a public place. Now, the public place is the key opportunity. And this is an opportunity where you find the most concentration of business activities, and particularly public spaces that are along high streets, within transport nodes, etc. These are absolutely critical. So if you're a person that is starting up a business, you probably, unless you're home-based and you've got a little bit of capital to start something from home, you need to enter that public space. Now, what I'm talking about are the reciprocal arrangements between traders that say, okay, you can come and join, you can come and trade within our space. And one of the things that I was always impressed by was this ability to accommodate new entrants, this sense of, I'll look after your stand while you go home and fetch your children or you attend to something else. So those are the kind of reciprocal arrangements that play a critical role in the survival of businesses. And they go beyond just accommodating people and looking after stands, but they also relate to insurance for when there's a crises that happen, a death, a funeral, etc. So these are key, what I would call reciprocal relationships that help a small business sustain, given the highly competitive nature of the township economy, as I've tried to outline, and the fact that the likelihood is that most businesses will churn very quickly. It's not to say it's perfect. There is rent-seeking behavior we see in many different contexts, but what I'm trying to argue for is this emphasis on creating accommodating platforms. And if you look at the number of public markets that we have in South Africa, there's a deficiency. And I'm not now talking about the township, I'm just taking a slightly broader lens and looking at the inner city. It's only in eThekwini where we see like a legacy of public markets. In most of our towns and cities across South Africa, there's a deficit of public markets. And public markets can become, if they're organized and managed in a way that can accommodate new entrants, in a rules-based system that places emphasis on reciprocity rather than on creating these very successful entrepreneurs, I think we're going in the right direction.
Prof, there was a clear disagreement with you on the size of the informal sector, and perhaps maybe supplementing those data sets with, other data sets. What's your response to the question that was from the lady?
Yeah, thanks. I thought about this question, and it ties back to this debate which the CEO of GTAC had with the Statistician General a few months ago now. And it's really, how big is the sector? Look, from a design perspective, and some people at UCT actually did participate in the debate. It got quite public. I never said anything. So I'll tell you two stories, right? On the one side, when we're designing these surveys, we're very careful to ask like a series of questions, including like, did you do anything with your family? Did you do anything like, which was not a job, but like begging or doing some small activities? Like we ask about 7 different questions to try to get at economic activity. And from there, you code upwards to create the employment not employed variable. So in theory, we would get a lot. On the other hand, and when that debate played out, I was remembering a time about 10, 15 years ago, I was doing field work. We were going to run a livelihood study in the Eastern Cape. It's in a small valley next to the University of Fort Hare. And so I went because we needed to test our survey instrument. And there were 12 people in the room, myself and someone else from UCT, so 10 people who were going to run the study for us. And so to practice, we made everyone fill out the questionnaire for themselves. And out of the 10 who were going to run the study, one had a job, or at least that's what the data would have said to me. But we were working together for over 2 or 3 days to train on how to run the survey. And so we got to know people and we talk over coffee and lunch and stuff. And then by the end of it, I realized that just by talking to people, the unemployment rate in the conception of an economist would have been closer to 80%. Sorry, the employment rate, right? So one lady, and it was amazing for me because one lady, she had a fridge and you could rent space in a fridge and put chicken or meat or milk or anything that goes off. And I don't know what was the rate, but she didn't think of it as a business. She was doing a service to her neighbors. But it is an economic opportunity for money. Another person had chickens and they sold eggs. Another person, they're the person in the village who had a car. And they didn't think of themselves as an Uber. That time there was no Uber actually in South Africa. But they didn't think of themselves as a taxi driver. Except if someone needed a ride into town or to the hospital or somewhere, you could ask them and you're expected to contribute to fuel. But when I asked how much was the rate, it was much more than just fuel. It would have to include some element of time and labor and capital and all those things. So there's an element of how people think about what is a job and what is an activity, which is not working so well. So that's the one side which I say it's not going to measure perfectly. But the other side which I took away from it was that if I'm interested in poverty or inequality, which are the two big things that we study anyway, it will matter, but not that much. Because for all those people except the guy with the car, it wouldn't change in a substantive way how I thought of their welfare in a material sense. So he was one, and okay, so maybe 1 out of 10 is a big deal, but that's the question then.
And that's where we leave it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that that discussion was very fruitful. I know that we probably wanted more discussion and ask more questions, but unfortunately we are out of time. Can you please give it up for our fantastic panelists and Prof for that amazing, amazing presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now 3:15. We are going to have a coffee break and we should be back here at exactly 3:45. So please do enjoy yourselves. Make sure that we are back on time so that we can continue on with our conference.
Good job. That was great, really.
Thank you.
Good job, Andrew. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Prof. Thanks, Prof. Wow, that was fantastic presentations, guys. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? The event will be starting shortly. We kindly ask all delegates to make their way back to the conference room and take their seats. We appreciate your cooperation and look forward to an engaging and productive session ahead. Thank you.
All right, may we please get settled down so we can get started and proceed. We're gonna go to a penultimate session for the day. I'm sure most of you are tired and you can't wait for a networking session. So the sooner we do this, the better. But I would really ask you to keep paying attention as we are in the critical time of the program. By the way, I'm not sure if you still have your quotations with you. I'm just gonna go to a gentleman there with a dark tie. I'm looking at him directly next to just there. Yeah. There's a gentleman there with a gray suit, a maroon tie, blue shirt. Look, yeah, that's you. Do you have your quotation with you? Is the roving mic in the room? Someone with a roving mic, please. My good sir can't wait to share what his quotation is all about. Do you have a roving mic in the room? Not yet? Oh my goodness. All right. We'll come back to you a bit later. I was hoping we would hear from you, but keep thinking about it. Keep thinking about it, and then we'll get to hear from you. Right, so we're going to swift to a quite important area of discussion. It's all good to talk about jobs. It's all good to talk about employment and unemployment. But the key question is, who's funding those jobs? And if we do fund those jobs, which sectors are worth of funding and which sectors can create the much needed employment? And to help us to decipher some of these questions is someone that works directly with such data and such numbers. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome Najwa Idris.
Buddy? Hello? Are we here? Don't make me sound like I'm an echo in the room. You're here, present. So I don't want to be standing up here alone, right? So I'm going to invite Professor Harun Barat. He's a man who ends his day with a cup of rooibos tea and chocolate, okay? But he's also an unfulfilled runner, having completed. So, this morning was all about data and evidence. So I'm going to start with the evidence piece, right? I'm going to ask the team over there, and I'm going to ask all of you to watch with me a video. And the video you are about to watch is an example, in the words of Professor Barat, giving more oxygen to small business owners. The Jobs Fund and Aid to Pay partnered to scale technology-driven solutions that support township and rural enterprises. The market constraint we sought to address was limited access to informal businesses that had access provided via digital financial services, efficient trading systems, and resilient business infrastructure. A challenge that became even more pronounced during the COVID epidemic. Video, please.
Hello, my name is David Maluleka, and I've got a spaza shop, David's Mansion Network, which is based on Dobsonville, Soweto. Because I started a business here, I so it was a small tafulenyana. Then that's where the name came. It was David at first, then Munch, Ikenaka the snacks, Ikenaka the sweets, and then network, Ikenaka the phone, which was the public phone, and then at time it's one gamchi. So that's where David's Munch and network, the Kalitsa doing it. Business ya rona ke simolotse ka 25 rand ke rekisa box A1 ya code motho ke berekang le ke maniaka, which is maniaka ke na a simolotseng amfa yona box A1 ya 20 ha ke re ke berekile ka letsatsi 2 carton ne khona go e fetsa in the shop. The challenges se kopana le tsona mo businessing in most cases ke taba ya finance finance just because rona gona motho o bereka mntlu, so ke taba ya gore ne re balance ka mo setting ka mo re khona reka borotho re khona reka bopinyana re khona wetsa so A to pay they offered me this machine ya bona ba mplela gore no this machine works like a Kodi ShopRite and Pick n Pays. You're gonna record the stock inside this machine and you're gonna see your sales inside this machine. You can see the profit ya gago gore o bereka yang ga gona sa go sna stock go sna eng o tlo kgona go bona mo motšhining wa ithuke gore ke eng e fela ke eng e sa fela. Every morning ha ke tsoga I check the machine ke a bona gore ke eng items tse tsamaileng ke eng items tse di fokotsegileng, and then ha ke ya go stock ke itse ke lata 1 2 3 4 5 just because machine o khona bontsha gore ke eng e felang ke eng e sa feleng. So to bula shop ka 5 6 7 8 up until 8:30 busy that time. 9 from 9 to 12 1 ke mote mo simolang gonna slow, and then business push normally. Then ka bo 1 ka nako ya bana ba sekolo ya ga ba tswa go sekolo now ke mote mo simolang another traffic ya bana the snacks the sweets, but from 5 ka ba buile ba tswa mosebetsing then ke mote mo simolang ya no gonna le traffic ya no gonna le line e telle it's busy gonna le ntho e tsamaya. Then 8:30 ke mote mo re kwalang shop ya rona, and then kana ka mogare then cash up the machine and we check stock gore what king e tsamaileng king e sa tsamayang, and then from there we are gonna be busy for the next coming day. So kamo kitchen ngam ke mote mo everything e etsagetseng mote, as I've said, or public phone is small go ntle, and then e beretsana ka yona motho le ke na le pattern and list sa public phone. Then we get ka mo dining room, and then space ne ke rekisa mo so window ne ke berekisang ke yona. So ke mote mo le gore now business ne golella e impontsha now A to pay getting the arrangement le lona, and then le loaning chelete so that I can build a structure e le goreng e tlo khona go accommodate stock sa ka kaofela. Then from kamo then I moved kamo the real spaza the spaza sa tota. Then loan I think e be ke simolla ke aga from this whole thing, then we get thuba le mo gore tle khone ke etse space ya di fridge ka mola, then ke sona spaza se le gore from A ka montle re tla so up until ke tlo fela. Now I'm settled ka mo ke spaza se feletseng fela tla le yong ke to ka business ke batla go bona bana ba ko gae ba ile goreng ba bone every step e ke tsereng mo businessing e but ntho important ke gore ke batlo ba bontsha bone ba ko gae gore at least ga ba ka gata mo ke gatang mo teng so that in the next coming 5-10 years when I count nna e nne nna e tlabe ke ba rutang mosebetsi o tlo kgonang go jesa rona mo family united I think e tla etsa gore re nne more bigger than this.
Dumelang, lebitso la ka ke Manta Maluleka, ke nna Antiwa David. So re simolotse business ka 2011 in hope gore re tlo godisa business e ya rona and re bona e le a bigger one. Re movile from this joint re ile go the bigger joint and then re na le di branchnyana from different places.
So best advice, concentrate guys, try gore o communicate with the customers tsa gago, budget o focus mo business ya gago. O sa wa khatla motho o bontsha motho gore wena you've got this but focus then you see you achieve what you want. Sure.
Thank you so much to the crew over there for flighting that video. South Africa's unemployment challenge is too large and too complex for any single intervention to solve. In that context, the Jobs Fund was created with a specific purpose, not to replace mainstream labor market programs, but to identify, test, and scale job creation solutions that work. When we talk about public spending, we often focus on how much money government allocates. At the Jobs Fund, we focus on a different question. How much additional economic activity, investment, and employment can be unlocked from every rand invested? That idea has guided the Jobs Fund since 2011 and remains at the heart of our approach today. Over the next few minutes, I would like to show how the Jobs Fund uses public resources as catalytic capital, mobilizing private investment, testing new job creation models, and generating evidence that can strengthen employment policy across government. I also want to briefly introduce an independent evaluation undertaken by the Development Policy Research Unit at UCT. The key question underpinning our work is simple. How can public funding be used most effectively to unlock jobs, investment, and innovation at scale? The Jobs Fund was established by the National Treasury in 2011 with an initial allocation of 9 billion. What makes the fund different is that it operates as a challenge fund. Rather than funding activities because they fit a program, we fund ideas that can demonstrate their potential to create jobs and solve labor market challenges. 4 design principles have remained constant over 14 years. Funding is allocated competitively and transparently. Grants are catalytic and once-off rather than permanent subsidies. And importantly, the fund was designed as a targeted complement to broader labor market policies. The Jobs Fund does not claim to solve structural unemployment. Its purpose is to reduce risk for innovation, test new approaches, generate evidence, and identify models that can be scaled by government, markets, and other institutions. In short, we don't fund projects simply to spend money. We fund projects to learn about what works and to mobilize others to invest alongside us. This slide simply illustrates the logic of a challenge fund model. We start with social and economic challenges that cannot be solved by government alone. The fund then uses targeted public funding to crowd in additional resources from the private sector, civil society, and other partners. What gets leveraged, however, is not only money. It is innovation, expertise, networks, technology, and implementation capacity. We support interventions across 4 funding windows: support for work seekers, enterprise development, infrastructure investment, and institutional capacity building. So look at both supply side of the labor market as well as the demand side. Importantly, most of our investments work on the demand side of the labor market. This reflects a fundamental reality. South Africa's biggest labor market challenge is not only preparing people for work, it is creating sufficient opportunities for people to work. The ultimate objective is not to fund projects indefinitely. It is to produce tested solutions that can be replicated, expanded, and institutionalized at scale. This is where the economics of the model become particularly important. Since inception, the Jobs Fund has disbursed 7.8 billion in grant funding. Our partners have contributed 15.8 billion alongside that investment, creating a total portfolio of 23 billion. In other words, every rand invested by the Jobs Fund has mobilized more than 2 additional rand from our partners. For National Treasury, this is one of the most important measures of success. The objective is not simply to spend public money. The objective is to use public money strategically to unlock far greater levels of investment and activity in the economy. Across 184 projects, this funding has supported businesses, communities, work seekers, and entrepreneurs while maintaining a highly competitive grant cost per job. And beyond the numbers, more than 3 billion has gone directly into the hands of beneficiaries through salaries, wages, and stipends. That means public expenditure has translated into immediate economic participation and household income. Beyond the jobs, the portfolio has supported more than 63,000 SMEs, almost 17,000 emerging farmers, and nearly 600,000 individuals through work readiness and skill interventions. Ladies and gentlemen, the most important message on this slide is found in the lower panel. The Jobs Fund was never intended to be judged only by the number of jobs. We're not a mass employment program. Its broader role is to function as government's innovation laboratory. The real test for us is whether solutions proven through the Jobs Fund support go on to influence markets, government programs, and national policy. That is why we are particularly proud of examples such as SA Youth Mobi, which has become a national platform connecting millions of young people to opportunities. The replication of the Black Citrus blended finance model, a model for blended finance in the agriculture sector. The influence of A2Pay on the design of the Spaza Shop Support Fund, and Harambe's contribution to more inclusive hiring practices in the rapidly growing business services sector. Many others have been exhibited throughout the day on the media wall. These examples demonstrate something important. The greatest impact of a challenge fund is often not the projects it funds, but the system it changes. After many years of implementation, we believe the fund should be assessed through independent evidence. For that reason, the Jobs Fund commissioned the Development Policy Research Unit at UCT, led by Professor Harun Borat, to independently evaluate the fund's 2 largest funding windows over a period of 2012 to 2024. The objective was straightforward: to rigorously assess the fund's contribution to employment creation and to generate practical lessons for future labor market interventions. The value we submit of any policy instrument ultimately rests on credible evidence, not internal reporting. The evaluation moved beyond simple asking how many jobs were created. Instead, they asked 5 policy-relevant questions. These are fundamentally questions about effectiveness, additionality, and money. The goal is not only to understand whether interventions work, It is to understand why they work, under what conditions they work, and how successful approaches can be replicated at scale. Ultimately, this is the purpose of the Jobs Fund, to turn public investment into evidence, evidence into policy, and policy into larger and more sustainable employment outcomes for South Africans. The question now is not whether the Jobs Fund created jobs. We know it did. The more important question is what those results tell us about designing labour market interventions in South Africa. To help answer that question, I would now like to invite Professor Harun Barat to share the findings of the independent DPRU evaluation and the lessons it offers for future employment policy. Prof. Barat, over to you.
Thanks very much, Najwa. So it was the end of the day, so I elected not to have a roving mic, so I could just stand and not walk around. I'm just waiting for my presentation to come up. So in many ways, Najwa's provided the background to the Jobs Fund, which was very, very useful, and as the slides are coming up, I'll give you a sense. So we thought we could add some value in the call for proposals from the Jobs Fund to say, well, look, we've got these interesting projects that we've run in within the Jobs Fund, who would be willing to provide an evaluation. We did so because we knew from the reports, so this is quite important in terms of where we thought we could add value, is we did so because we knew that there was data available that was of a very good quality within the Jobs Fund. So that was a really important primer in ensuring that we got that we could add value in terms of the evaluation. And then secondly, the methodological innovation we knew we could bring to bear to the Jobs Fund assessment of outcomes is something we really wanted to produce and showcase. So hopefully that will be of some interest here, and I'll spend a bit of time talking about this index of success. And now I've run out of things to say because I need my slides. So what we did do was, as the slides, I don't see them. No?
So school will get you a hard copy.
You've got a hard copy of my slides?
Of your slides.
Okay. So the evaluation is, in the presentation, is of the enterprise development window. So Najwa showed the enterprise development window. No, I have a copy, Najwa. It's what's not available on the screens. So the audience can't see. So we evaluated the support for work seekers grant, that funding window, and the enterprise development funding window. What I'm going to focus on is the evaluation of the enterprise development projects. Basically because the approach, certainly the results were different, obviously, because they're different projects, but the approach you're going to see was the same for both projects. Are you trying to find the slides? Okay. There we go. Okay. No, wrong one. No, we... So there should be two presentations. I sent the second one through. So I mean, maybe to talk you through just the funding dynamics first. So the way in which the presentation is structured, we look at the funding dynamics, and then I want to look at employment creation and the numbers of jobs created within the ED funding window, the cost of an ED job, and then I'll introduce this idea of a success index and a constraints index, and then talk to how that's a really useful way to think about evaluating projects. So the methodological innovation here is to think of the following thought experiment: is if a project created 10 jobs, right, but cost 1,000 Rand from the jobs fund and the co-funding was 10,000 Rand, right? But another project created the same number of jobs, but the co-funding was less. It's not clear which project was more successful. You can't just take one indicator. Simple example, another one is if one project created 10 jobs and another created 10 jobs, but the one project had a major power failure constraint to deal with, but the other project had no power failures. Didn't the one that faced the constraint perform better? So relative to constraints, did you not perform better? So there are a whole lot of things about which success indicator you're trying to use to measure outcomes, and are you trying to measure outcomes as against constraints? And those two sort of concepts are really important in thinking about the success index and the constraints index. So the ED projects, and now let me just go through the presentation. The ED projects, the ED funding window had 88 total projects. The split was more or less, if I get this right, 40% of those projects were in the primary sector, 50% in the tertiary sector, and then 10% in the secondary sector. So simply put, 90% of projects were either primary sector, so you can think of agriculture was the main driver there, or the tertiary sector, which would be services. The overall funding window, which would suggest that enterprise development, there we go, which would suggest that enterprise development was the dominant funding window. You can see that, right? That the overall funding we see for this funding window is about 13.4 billion, but again, you see the matched funding. So the idea that the state puts in 5 billion for enterprise development, but the matched funding coming from outside organizations stands at about 8.4 billion is a really important matched funding ratio, which is what you see at the bottom. So on average, right, if the state put up 1 Rand, the way to read that, the students should find it easy, if the state put up 1 Rand, right, on average, an outside organization or recipient organization put up 1 Rand 70. Okay? So that's a really important incentivizing, crowding in, complementing of a state initial shock or an initial stimulus from the state being crowded in by private sector, usually private sector investment, not totally. Right? So that's an important logic for what the Jobs Fund does. It's not, I'll be very, very clear, so you can think of it conceptually in policy terms, it's not a public works program. All right? So it's not jobs that are being wholly created by the state. It's actually trying to energize the supply side of the economy to create jobs. And in that sense, one of the things I'm surprised, so Najwa's being modest, and I think the founder, Andrew Donaldson, is here as well, is one of the few stimuli from government that's actually focused on the supply side. I more broadly get very worried, supply side of the economy, I get very worried about the fact that we see a sort of a growth or poverty alleviation agenda only through households. This goes through firms. Okay. In terms of sphere, I think this was the language the Jobs Fund preferred. You can see the distribution, right? So most of the funding went to, 41% of the projects went to NGOs, 50% went to the private sector firms, and then 10% to public sector. There is a distribution, so you'll find that in general, the public sector pushed up the average, right? But if I take that 1 Rand 70 average of mine, because the NGOs are below the 1 Rand 70, it's more or less on par with what an average private sector firm was giving. So an average private sector firm was giving about 1 Rand 90 for every 1 Rand of funding from government. So again, across the 88 projects, I think that's a good matched funding ratio. Okay. Now, what on the face of it seems like a really simple question is actually a little bit more complex than you'd think, which is how many jobs did you create, right? Here's your first problem, apart from being able to read any of this, right, is there are two typologies. Again, we are in the jobs fund universe, right? So I can't impose my first principles view of jobs, right? I have what the data provides me, and then I back out some kind of framework. So the jobs fund has essentially two types of labor market opportunities, not employment opportunities, labor market opportunities. What it does is to create employment opportunities, and I'm being careful about not calling it jobs just yet, right? And then training opportunities, which is in the green rectangle, okay? And we need to count both, okay? So, but if we ask the question, how many jobs did the jobs fund create across the projects in the ED in this case, I have lots of different definitions. And what you'll see here is there are jobs, full-time, because that's your first primary entry point, right? It's a 40-hour-a-week full-time job that we've created, right, for the project duration. But you can also get part-time jobs, right? You can also get placements, right? You can also get internships and short-term jobs, informal work, and so on. There are different types of employment opportunities besides a full-time job. And so I have to be careful, right? I have to be really careful because I know I don't need to count a training opportunity, but I have to be careful that if somebody's on an internship or if somebody's given seasonal work in an agriculture project, that's not one job. Is everybody clear on that, right? And so that's really, really important in project evaluation because you're going to come across this time and time again across all sorts of projects inside and outside of the jobs fund, right? And so enter the notion of full-time equivalents. Very important, right? And so what we ended up doing in the projects, again, because the data was very clear, is that we could see that if you were given a seasonal job, right, we counted that not as one job, but as a third of a job, or in the language, and this is not our language, FTEs are very common in the labor economics literature, or right, even outside of labor economics, in the macro literature, we count FTEs, full-time equivalents, right? So in this case here, a fixed term job, for example, is 10% of a full-time equivalent. So when I'm counting, when I end up counting all the projects, all the employment opportunities created within the ED projects, I have the data set, right, which looks at all these internships, seasonal jobs, fixed term contracts, full-time jobs that are created, and I scale them accordingly. That's really important, okay? When I scale them, I end up with FTEs, right? And here's a really important, and I needed this, or we needed this as the unit, in order to give some kind of relative value to the jobs created by the jobs fund, right? This is not to say that, to signal that the jobs fund should now be a sector of its own, right? It's just to give an indicative sense, and we were very, very surprised by the scale, right? So if you count all the ED jobs from the beginning of the first ED project to the end of its life, right? So you treat it as some sort of discrete time period, right? So there is no concern about stocks versus flows and so on. It's just beginning project and end project. Count all the jobs, scale them to FTEs. This is what you find, that over the ED period, the enterprise development window period, which is 2012 to 2024, the South African economy created about 2.3 million jobs. 5% of those jobs, right, were jobs fund jobs. 138,000 FTEs. That's a huge number, right? I don't think that necessarily, so let me be clear, I don't want to be the cheerleader for the jobs fund, right? That's not my job, right? That's not necessarily only a solid performance from the jobs fund. Najwa's looking at me very skeptically there. But it's also an indication, frankly, of the very poor performance of the South African economy in terms of job generation. So just keep that in mind, right? But the point is to get 5% of total employment creation out of, right, the total contribution from the state that is matched funding is a really important indication of why, let's call it, active supply side policies can have positive outcomes. What's the thing to take care of? The caveat is we don't know beyond 2024 of the second quarter whether these jobs continued, right? We can't say anything about that. But certainly, as the first primer of was the ED a success, my word, I do think it was, right? I mean, 5% of total employment generation on an FTE basis seems like a pretty sterling performance. Again, we can go through the targets by individual, and I'll come to that later actually. But we do look later on at targets by gender, by race, by disability and so on, and youth and non-youth. You see the formal targeting there, but I want to hold off and show you whether the Jobs Fund has achieved all those targets relative to some baseline. Okay. But here's the backing out of the numbers that follow from that methodology, which is the FTEs, right? And what you see is the total employment opportunities, now I'm counting all of those, right, constitute about 54% of the total labor market opportunities. So that's that 138 I counted, right? That's about 54%, okay, relative to training opportunities, which constitute 46% of all the activations, if you like, through the Jobs Fund. So one of the things I think we do need to be aware of is that the Jobs Fund is probably a jobs and training fund, right? And the unobservable from this evaluation is how many of those training opportunities then resulted in employment opportunities. We don't see that either, right? So there are all sorts of add-ons and follow-ups that we can't observe. But in essence, for every one training opportunity, we had 1.19 or 1.2 employment opportunities that were generated. Okay. I want to, though, embed this in actual numbers so you could see, and again, unfortunately, not that clear, but there's the top number here is the 138,000 jobs created, right? But the overwhelming majority of these employment opportunities are actually jobs. So the good news is, right, is because I mentioned the FTE, but I didn't tell you what share of total employment opportunities were part-time jobs, seasonal jobs. So it turns out that the overwhelming proportion, right, 108 of the 137,000 of the employment opportunities were full-time jobs. So the good news is that the Jobs Fund is generating, let's call it sustainable rather than part-time or seasonal jobs overwhelmingly, right? Let's see what else we can see. And then you see the training opportunities. So interestingly, and so it goes against my preference, which is very few, in fact, zero informal sector opportunities. So one of the critiques you could embed is say, well, okay, you did enterprise development, but even our wonderful video insert we saw was essentially a formal sector SPASA operator, right? So the extent to which one of the learnings is to what extent have you explored non-traditional forms of employment in the informal economy would be something to think about. Even when you break it down by sector, you get more or less the same distribution, which is employment intensive relative to training, except in the secondary sector. Certainly where you see the ratio changes. Okay. However, when you break down by group and disaggregate performance, you find that by gender and by race, there's an overperformance by the Jobs Fund, but slightly marginal underperformance in terms of youth and the disabled. And the benchmark we use is what is the ratio of the employed in the full population of the economy, and we then assess the Jobs Fund against that target. So here's just a little footnote, which is please don't report, if you're ever doing an evaluation, simply one statistic which says this project or this particular intervention created jobs so that 30% of all jobs created were for women. Well, that's meaningless, right? There has to be a benchmark. Against what, right? Well, relative to the share of women that are employed in the economy, that 30% is actually much lower, for example. So there was an underperformance. And hence this point of using benchmarks and baselines to make sure that you get more accurate and relative performance figures. But how costly was the ED jobs? And so we find, if we back out estimates of that 138,000 jobs, right, we then look at the new jobs created, the 108,000, we end up with a per FTE job creation of about 8,000 Rand. Okay, that is fairly consistent by sector, except for the secondary sector where you tend to find the jobs are far more expensive. Now, one of the things we wanted to get at is, does it mean that across projects, because remember, we had 88 projects, if you spend more across projects, do you see higher numbers of jobs created? Because I'm giving you averages, right? I don't see the full distribution, and that's what this graphic does. It's a simple linear relationship scatter plot across all projects to show as the grant value goes up, so I've taken the log of the grant value, so do the number of jobs created go up. And you know from your matric maths that the slope will tell you that marginal impact, right? So for every 1 Rand that you spend, it turns out that an additional job pretty much is created. That's a really powerful result, right? So for every additional Rand of spending by the Jobs Fund, Najwa can sit there based on the ED results and say, we know that we will get at least 1 job out of every, whatever the denominator is, Rand that we're going to spend. Now, what it also means is you see the distribution around that linear graph. So I'll pause there. That's what you need to be thinking about. From an evaluation perspective, you get overperformers and you get underperformers, because I'm giving you the average. So you can immediately, with this slope, say, well, I've given you more money, but you're creating less jobs. Or I can look at my projects here and look at those projects that are performing below the line or above the line. That's a really important result, right? So think evaluation terms all the time. So it's through a simple linear regression, which is just what this is, you back out an evaluation tool. If you're still confused, this is the grant value here. Yes? Now I wish I did have the roving mic. So take that simple linear regression, which is putting you to sleep and you're thinking, oh, that's the slope and so on. But look at this grant value. So if you take a grant value that's somewhere over here, let's call that figure 19, and there are a whole lot of dots at 19. Do you see that lined up as a vertical line? Yeah? That means across 19, there's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, let's call it 10 projects where the jobs created is different. So what that tells you from an evaluation perspective is that there's a distribution. I'm getting really labor-intensive projects right at the top for my 19 Rand, and I'm getting those that are less labor-intensive. That's the logic of a simple, let me correlate grant value against jobs scatter plot. And don't ever think that the information there doesn't allow you to then use that as an evaluation tool, because then Najwa can look at this and she can literally see which that bottom dot is and say, okay, that's that project, they're underperforming. That's this project in live terms, right? In real price, what do you call it, nowcasting. She can literally get quarterly figures to say, oh, that project's doing really badly compared to this project for the same amount of money I'm spending. But in essence, from our review, we show, luckily, for the project implementers, is that as they spend more, they get more jobs out of it, and that's that slope. But also at the same time, you'll see you can actually back out estimates to say, well, if you doubled the jobs fund's money, which is what this does here, what if we gave them 50% more money? What if we gave them 100% more, 150% more? The additional jobs that would be created sit in that yellow bar, right? So for example, if you doubled the jobs creation, jobs fund funding, you'd get 102,000 more jobs than you currently have, given the ED experience. So if you replicated the ED with double the money, you would get 102,000 more jobs, just simply based on that coefficient on average. That's what you would get, yeah? Some would overperform and some would underperform. Okay. So I promised you I'd talk about how you measure success, and I'm being told by the chair to hurry up, how you measure success and constraints. So I want to take you through a lot of words, but I refer to it in the introduction. There are multiple ways to measure success. Do you think success is about purely the number of jobs? Well, we know it's not just jobs, it's FTEs, so you got to get that right. But what about training? Surely that matters. What about co-funding? Surely you got to think about lots of co-funding means already partly a successful project. But there are also different constraints that different projects face that can explain lack of success. Power failures, you could have a low growth environment, and so on. So again, back to what I said to you at the outset, how do you measure a project A that creates 10 jobs versus a project B that creates 8 jobs? On the face of it, project B looks worse, but what if the project implementers, and that's a real case, will tell us, yeah, but this project B did really well to get to 8 jobs because they faced massive power failures. So thinking about success conditioned on constraints is a really important project evaluation tool. So the other thing that you're trying to solve for is that there are multiple types of success indicators, right? So you get number of jobs, number of trainees, co-funding, and so on. And there are all these indicators that the jobs fund already tracks. So then the thing is, well, which one matters more than the other? Do you pick one? Do you take all of them? And certainly when we workshopped with the jobs fund, the language was always, yes, this fund created so many jobs, but there was lots of co-funding. Or this project didn't create that many jobs, but they had lots of a very high training outcome. So the only way mathematically and technically that you can resolve these multiple indicators problem as a measure of success is to combine them. You combine them into a single measure of success, right? And this is the notion of a success index, okay? So a couple of things about that. Let me just, did I mention it here? Oh, are we new in doing this? No, right? You've all heard of the HDI, yes? The Human Development Index, that's exactly what it is. We don't know how to measure declines in, we can't say a decline in poverty is due only to income. What about housing? What about education? What about social security? Well, guess what happens? You combine all of those into a single measure called the Human Development Index. Now, I know there are criticisms of it, and we can talk about that, but it's essentially taking individual indicators, combining them into one, and equally weighting them. And that's what we did with the Enterprise Development Success Index, right? So we looked at the enterprise development projects, and we looked at the different dimensions of success. So, for example, total number of jobs created, the ratio of matched funding, the share of funding from loan capital, the number of distinct funding sources, and so on. All of these became different categories of success. We weighted them equally, and we combined them into a single measure of success. If you wanted the technical details, we can give you those, but you normalize the numbers so that lower is worse and higher is better. It's a very standard way of doing this. The Alki-Foster method does it. And so when you weight equally, you come up with a single number to say, how did this index score? How did this project score? All right? The thing to remember, just so I can clear the ways for all the questions, is you can change the weightings, and you can change the choice of indicators. So you don't have to equally weight. You can say, I want to weight jobs more than everything else. I'll have 80% weighting for jobs and 20% for everything else. You can do that. Or you can say, actually, I'm really not interested in dimensions 2 and 3. I only want to look at jobs. That's the only indicator I'm interested in. Give me that and measure success in that way. Fine, not a problem. You can impose the rule that you want as the policymaker, but be careful, all right? If you take away information, you lose it. So if somebody says this enterprise development project was absolutely the best on my success index, and I've only used 2 indicators and I've lost 20 of them, be careful, right? Be careful what you ask for. So what do you end up with? Well, here's the ranking. So what we do is we take all those indicators, right, those 20-odd indicators, whatever it was, I forget, 21 indicators, and we come up with a success index. And we say, which of the jobs fund, and I haven't named them, obviously, I've just got codes here, which of the jobs funds are the highest ranked in terms of success, and which are the lowest ranked. I now have an objective measure based on all these indicators combined into one index of the best performing and the worst performing ED. I do not, right, and I'm always averse to that. I don't have normative discussions. Oh, this project was really good and that project was really... I'm not in a happy place when I hear that, right? I want something that's tangible, that's measurable. And this is the best way to measure, right? How did a country do in terms of human development over the last 10 years? You take the HDI index and you measure it. In the same way you do you do an internal ranking. Now let's be very clear. It's not saying that the best job creator in the country was the ED projects ranked on top. It's saying of all the ED projects funded and co-funded within the jobs fund, here's the ranking. It's an internal ranking. So all I've done here is to give you the top 3, the middle 3, and the bottom 3. So now I have, from my success index, I have a ranking. But I can do the same thing in the let me just stop. Let me back this out. Is that somebody who does, so the way to think about this, right, is if you write a mathematics test, if you remember, you have 3 sections. You remember that? Algebra, geometry, and trigonometry. Remember that, right? Okay. I don't know, that's what it used to be in my day, right? But you could come first because you nailed algebra. You did the best in algebra and you did okay in trigs, and you like not so great on geometry, but you really nailed algebra, right? So what contributed the most to your ranking first? Algebra, yes? Does that make sense? Because they're equally weighted, right? You didn't get more marks. For every mark in geometry was the same as a mark in algebra was the same as the mark in trigonometry, right? Equally weighted. You get it? So which section, which indicator gave the most positive contribution, the highest contribution to the best ranked or the rankings of all the ED projects? It was dimension 1. Job creation accounted for 51% of the ranking score. Does that make sense? I kind of find that comforting because that tells me that its weight in the contribution was far more than, say, matched funding diversity, which is probably important but not overwhelmingly a driver of success. And likewise, project finances came in as 34%. But remember I said to you, success is also conditional because maybe I didn't do as well as Najwa in running the ED project because her ED project worked in a period when there were no power failures, and I worked in a period when there were only power failures. But if I created the same number of jobs as her, well, maybe I did better than her, actually, right? So enter the idea of constraints. You cannot measure success without making it conditional on something. And so we take the same approach. Here we had 65 different indicators. We weighted them equally across all dimensions. Human capital. Maybe you had educational constraints. Maybe there were, the classic one is infrastructure, but maybe there were also regulations. Maybe I worked in an environment that was highly regulated, whereas Najwa's wasn't. And so I did really well because the regulations were constraining me. Fiscal, and then a macro, of course. Growth, currency volatility, and so on. Weather shocks, particularly for agriculture, right? We weight each of them equally. Incidentally, the equal weighting is not just our treating fairly kind of approach. It's actually shown in the Alki-Foster literature. Some of you know the index literature, know this well. Is James Foster shows this consistently. You change the weights, you don't get very different results. Equal weighting is the way to go. You could go principal components, and that gets technical, but we're there. Again, you could say, the Jobs Fund could come to us and say, why are you using dimension 4 and 5? We don't want that. So you've imposed a policy rule. A policymaker could say the only constraints we want are dimension 1 and 5, for example. And you can impose that, that's fine. As long as you're clear, you're losing information. So when we take that, these are the projects that face the most constraints versus the least constraints. So now if you start thinking about it, right, this could be me, because now I'm in this ED project that had all these power failures, and the one on the far right could be Najwa. She had no power failures. So I need to find a way, and these were the contributions, less interesting. The macro stuff was a particular constraint for these projects. I need to find a way to combine these two things. The winners, or the big job creators, the high success in a constrained environment. And the way we did it, right, is a grid which, and this is now where I've entered the dark side, because now I start sounding like McKinsey, right? So you have a constraints index, right? So that's that score. So on the horizontal axis, you've got the constraints index score, from lowest constraint to highest constraints. You see that? And on the vertical axis, I've got the success, the least successful to the most successful. Do you see that? But what I've got is, what is your score? Your constraints index score could be low, and you could get high employment outcomes. That's Najwa, her project. But maybe you could be me, which is I have a very high constraint, but I still get the same number of jobs as her. You see that? Does that make sense? And so we end up with this grid of where projects could be. So you could get what we call high, this is the dark side. I didn't make this up, but the researchers made this. High risk, high reward projects. So those projects that are in high risk environment, these massive constraints, but they give you big returns. You get the ideal projects, which is no fuss, very low constraints, right? And they give you lots of jobs. You get the barrier impacted projects because they didn't perform really well, but that's because they were in a high constrained environment. Then you get the underperformers. Those are the ones that had low constraints, but they still give you below average jobs. Yeah? Does all of that make sense? So the cool thing is, I can give you the actual graphic. And that's the graphic you get from the ED projects. So in the ED projects, each bubble, where the bubble size is the number of jobs created, each quadrant is then fitted into a project. So I can tell you this project, the orange projects exceeded expectations. They shouldn't have achieved that many jobs above average, right? Because they face such high constraints. That's these guys here. The natural winners are the ones you should continue to support because they had low constraints and they gave you lots of jobs. The barrier impacted ones are difficult because you don't know how many jobs they would have created because they had all these constraints. But at least from a project evaluation perspective, you know which are the dogs, right? You know which ones you've got to get rid of, and those are the light blue ones because they had low constraints and they give you very few jobs. And that for me is for us to bring together. So this was something we concocted through brainstorming within the DPRU, within the unit. We said, look, there's a way to think of constrained success or conditional success. And out of this pops, in our view, a really illuminating way to think about success conditional on specific constraints. So what we do find, though, actually, is that we didn't really need to tell the jobs fund this because they were learning. And so we find over the course of a project's lifespan, they were naturally moving away from the dogs slowly towards the diamonds. But what this tends to do is, at least for us, is it gives you the nowcasting. So the idea is that Najwa can say to the project managers, and this is a public good, they can go and use it, right? They don't need us anymore. They can say, Najwa can say, give me this graphic now in Q1. I want to see what's going on. Doesn't mean you pull the funding. It means you go to the light blues, right? And you say, hey, what's going on? Why are you underperforming? What's going on? And can we help, right? And so on. Okay. Final slide. Is there a whole host of lessons, right? Many of which I think Najwa actually alluded to at the outset. But for us, you know, there's a whole lot of strategic lessons. Some of them, I would rather just pick out a few of them, is the macro environment is crucial. It's very difficult, right, to kickstart in a sort of El Nino year, for example, right? Really sort of growth enhancing, employment generating agriculture projects. So the macro environment is crucial. That's an important strategic lesson. Sectoral diversification will differ, so we can show those bubbles, for example, by sector. You can see which sectors will struggle relative to others because of global competition. The operational lessons is that you've got to have an adaptive project design and you have to be flexible. So the idea that you can pivot away and into some projects and away from others is something that lives in the data in our view. And then finally, from the financial and sustainability lessons perspective, I think the model works really, really well. It's linear in matched funding, so the more matched funding and the more funding, it's certainly better, at least on the basis of this evidence, and it doesn't seem to be tapering off. So, and that seems like a positive outcome. But let me leave you with the idea that at least what I try to do in this input is to give you some of the tools to think about project evaluation within the context of using what I think is a very deep and interesting academic literature around indexes, right? And using the index literature to bring to bear as a project evaluation tool. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Haroon. I'm sure the audience and everybody in the room are anxious to ask some questions. So instead of me leading off with a question, I'm going to give it over to you. And I don't know where Vusi is, if anybody is tracking the online audience, if there's any questions from there. But I see a hand right in the middle and one in front here. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for the presentation. I am Maremo Mphahlele is my surname. I'm a student at the University of Johannesburg. I'm doing my master's in competition and economic regulation. So, where I work now, I'm attached to an organization called National Agricultural Marketing Council. So we work with various NGOs. I think it's some of them which benefited from the Job Fund, because we went to some of their projects where we really saw the impact of Jobs Fund in the farms, especially in the Western Cape, those which are working with organizations such as the Hotfin. But the question that I have is on your methodology. Do you have this methodology as part of probably publications which you made for the report? Because from our side, the evaluation which we do, we go to the farm and see the work that has been done by the NGOs. But we would really like to, see the methodology that we did so we can be able to see if we can improve some of our work. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Yes, it's available.
And you have an answer.
Good afternoon. My name is Yangama Cheke from Nelson Mandela University. I am a master's candidate in economics. My question is, how would you distinguish between economies of scale in larger projects and the causal effect of additional grant funding on unemployment? In other words, does an elasticity of 0.945 reflect program effectiveness or mainly the project size? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry, it's me again. My name is Gracious. I'm doing my PhD in economics at Stellenbosch. My question is also around the methodology. I think I might have missed this, but when you were evaluating the success of the Jobs Fund, did you employ a quasi-experimental methodology? If not, how did you account for omitted variables, endogeneity? So the omitted variables could be stuff like regulations, as you mentioned. And does formulating an index deal with these issues, or should we be interpreting these results as correlation and not a causal relationship? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then take one from you, Vusi, from the online audience.
Sure, thanks, Najwa. And look, I think there's Anonymous with a rather simple yet profound question that came in. Straightforward, which sectors are worth of funding to create more jobs? Which sectors are worth funding to create more jobs? But Anthony Hazel asked a question that sort of lacks context, and I hope you'll understand what he means. What about labor absorption rates of trainees versus overall population? This probably around one of the statements you made. What about labor absorption rate of trainees versus overall population? That's how the question is phrased. Thank you.
Thank you, Vusi. Over to you, Arun.
Okay, those were nice questions. So the economies of scale question is precisely that, right? So the idea that the slope is 0.945 or whatever means that if the indicator of project size is funding, then that's on average what we're showing is that larger funding should have a one-to-one relationship with jobs. That's effectively in log terms, right? That's effectively what that relationship suggests. Now, if you extend the idea, you can run a whole bunch of bivariate scatter plots, right? So you can say, okay, well, did matched funding, right? Did an increase in matched funding result in the same one-to-one relationship? Or, right, or trying to think of another, you could even take training opportunities. Did more training opportunities mean, right? So you've got to be careful because of the causality, but the most obvious is if you spend more, are you getting? Why we were interested in that is because you don't want any non-linear relationships. So as the sample size grows, do you find that this thing doesn't, that the thing starts looking non-linear? So at some point you figure out that you're getting a declining return for every amount that you're spending. Now, what's more interesting for me is on the sectoral side is, and that relates to the online question, is that clearly some sectors will create fewer jobs than others. So some sectors are more naturally labor intensive, like services. Primary here is not mining. Because it's agriculture, you actually tend to see lots of jobs being created. Secondary doesn't create as many jobs as tertiary and primary. The thing I will say, though, is even though it's a jobs fund metric, is it possible that you think of industrialization as the success determinant, and in that measure, the secondary sector support is actually crucial despite it not creating as many jobs because you're supporting industrialization. No, so for Rachel's question, we obviously couldn't do a national experiment because we had the data, right? So we didn't have other projects that were next to Jobs Fund projects that looked the same, in the same area, and that didn't get Jobs Fund support, right? That would be the experiment. We don't observe that at all. So what we remember, what we're not trying to do is establish causality. That's not the purpose. What you're trying to establish is what are the determinants of success? A very different question, right? And that's how we provided the ranking and so on. I think it's a great question which we didn't explore, which is, which was my by rare point. So do you find that more trainees, so there's two questions embedded. If you had more trainees, did you have more jobs? We can look at that. But did the number of trainees lead to job creation for those trainees is something we don't observe, because we don't observe them after the project. So that's, again, a sort of post-project follow-up. But
I think I can respond to that. So in the Jobs Fund, we'll never fund a project and only fund the training component. The training component must result in a placement. So we lock our partners in. You don't train for the sake of training. You train for what the demand looks like. And after you've gone through that training program, there is a transition into a job that is facilitated through the Jobs Fund partner. So there, it's 0-0 time, everybody. But I just wanted to give the audience an opportunity. If you go to the Slido poll, do tell us, do you think that the index approach is a useful starting point for the assessment of labour market interventions? We'd like to see your answers up here. And then to you, Haroon, the Jobs Fund is a learning fund. What do we do better? We open up a new funding round. What do we focus on?
Yeah, so actually, I mean, the big plus for us is that you had good data. So I think, so keep doing that, right? That's the first thing. Maybe different funding windows would make it be strategic about the funding windows. So just to repeat what I said earlier, don't choose agriculture this year because of El Nino, for example. My pet, of course, would be to look at informality and look at micro enterprises, and that kind of funding window would be useful. It's a difficult one because you have very strong private sector providers, and I think they still view this as sort of CSI type support and so on. If there's a way to embed the Jobs Fund into and being seen as an incentivized job creation mechanism of some sort, I think that would be one important change. But I'm sure there are others that I haven't thought of.
Thank you very much, Professor Haroon Barat from the DPRU. The audience thinks that, this index approach is a useful approach and it should be extended to other labour market interventions and the assessment thereof. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much for listening to us.
Thank you so much, Najwa and Prof, for the insightful presentation, the benchmarks and the indexes that keep us learning. I'm sure we know now, Najwa, where to put the money at to create those jobs that are coming to save our youth. Ladies and gents, we're almost at the end of the session. As you can see, our artist is making his way for us to decipher. As he's making his way, is my guy still there? You got your code, yeah? Right. Where's the roving mic? I'm going to give it one more try. There. My good sir is at the back there. I just want to get to hear from him what his code says and what it means to him. And after that, you go to Yanga Majek. I think Yanga said he was sitting somewhere there. Yanga is there. Yeah, get your code ready as well. Go ahead, say what code did you get in the morning? What does it mean to you? And what do you make of it?
The quote goes, "The future depends on the questions we dare to ask today." I think it's very easy to be pessimistic about the state of the country and the way things might go.
Right.
I think that's a natural tendency if you sort of follow the news and you listen to popular rapport. When I think about the quote and I think about the conference and the climate in which it exists and the context in which we sort of take part, I think to myself, there's obviously a fantastic opportunity to affect proceedings. I mean, that's the great thing about education. It gives you the tools to do so. So, all in all, holistically thinking about it, I think what the quote is inferring and what it's ultimately pointing towards is addressing what we believe is pertinent and what we think is sort of a catalyst for change, and having the, both the courage and the foresight to do so.
Right. Please give me a round of applause for that. What a beautiful response. And Yanga will tell us what the quote means to him and what he makes of it. Yanga, I'll ask you to be very brief, like the quote you have in your hand.
Okay. The quote I had states that research is the first step toward relevance. And to me, research is the foundation of meaningful contributions. So before we can influence policy or improve communities or even solve economic challenges, I must first understand them. Basically, research transforms evidence into impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yanga. Please give him a round of applause. All right, a moment we've been waiting for. As you've seen, he's been scribing on his board, and as we make statements from the opening to now, some of the graphics are laid out there at the back. You can have a look at them when we finish. But yeah, I'll give it up to Carlos Amato to give us a nice descriptive explanation and summary of what transpired today. Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Hi, everybody, and thank you very much for your enthusiastic response to these drawings. I really appreciate it. My background is in journalism. I worked for a long time at the Sunday Times as a features writer and a football writer. And more recently, in the last few years, I've worked as a political cartoonist for the Mail and Guardian and News 24. So that background proved quite useful when I started out recently doing this work, which we call graphic recording, but we also call it visual harvesting and sketch noting and graphic facilitation, and we need to find one name for it, just for the purpose of brand recognition. So I'm sticking to graphic recording because a lot of people don't know about it, and we're having a lot of fun with it. And the essence of it is that when you combine words and pictures, you get a better grip on ideas, because ideas are slippery, and if they're presented and condensed using PowerPoints, which is a very familiar language, and very kind of, you almost fall asleep when you look at a PowerPoint often, no matter what's in it. It could be telling you that you're about to win $1 million, but because it's in a PowerPoint, you can't really absorb it. And I know they're necessary, but this way of communicating and condensing ideas seems to generate more click in people's minds. Not because I understand the issue more than you guys do. I don't at all. I'm not at all an expert in this, but all I have to do is listen very closely and try to extract the essence from a layman's perspective and create a visual metaphor for it. So these 6 drawings seem to be the ones that work best. I'm just judging by the response, but also the ones that I enjoyed most. And yeah, it's about, trying to find a light metaphor here and there. Evidence and empathy must get married to find the way forward. And then just sort of little references to history. There's the famous photo of the teenager carrying his sister from June 16. And then, one striking image that attracts the eye as the starting point when you're looking at it. So you have to have one champion image. So I put a lot of time into these bricks just to sort of communicate the toughness and hardness of the action required. And in this one over here, Prof. Barat just gave me metaphors non-stop. It's great when a speaker uses smoking guns, creative destruction, etc., etc. And here's South Africa looking in the mirror and seeing Europe and wanting to look like Europe. As it happens, yesterday came back from Mexico. I was doing some writing on the World Cup and on other stuff in Mexico and spent 2 weeks there in Mexico City. And wherever I went, there were micro enterprises on every corner. And I went everywhere. I went to the tourist sites, but I also went, took buses and underground trains. And in any underground train, a busker could walk on, a hawker could walk on and do their business without any interruption. Nobody's bothered, nobody complains. Everyone has the right to work, almost anywhere, which is very different from our reality. And I was struck by that. And so I was thinking about it, all the time over there, and then I arrive here and everyone's talking about it. So that's great if we can act on it and deregulate the informal economy. And then this one talks about the churn, the triangulation, the values. I mean, these two talks, counting the uncounted and carcinomics, are obviously related, but it was quick fire, so I had to kind of keep trying to extract all these facts because they were both under time pressure. So they were talking fast, so I had to draw fast. So it was quite stressful, but I did it, I think. And this is the early life story of Gigi Alcock from Singa to Josie to Cheeseboy Kota City over here. And here's the Amarumis staying in a township backrooms, a typical Mpumalanga mansion for the rural informal building boom. And Bucky ownership, Bucky hire, and here are the other key carcinomics products: renting, muti, food, hair and wigs, transport, etc. And down here, I blame this one on the jet lag. This is a sort of strange alien creature with a wallet combined with a pair of binoculars as an image for the Jobs Fund, which backs partners, but it also generates insight at the same time. So I take no responsibility for that one. And here, this one's about the three views of about measuring unemployment. It's a bit crowded, but I think it works well. I like the crab suggesting our sideways growth statistics. So thank you very much. My details are over here if you would like to hire me. And it's been a pleasure to deal with such interesting material. So thank you for looking.
Thank you so much. Carlos, before you go, so that we're clear, you don't have a hidden printer there that you had to stick these things here, all your drawings, right? It's all your hand.
Yeah, and that's why it's a bit messy. And that's also...
No. This is beautiful, right?
Well, I mean, messy in a good way. Thanks. But on that issue I think it's all the more enjoyable to watch someone drawing by hand these days because we're getting used to AI summaries, and a robot could do this, but they would do it in a very tedious way, I think.
Yeah, quite a compelling depiction of South Africa reflecting itself to Europe and what you experienced in Mexico, which is a developing country. It's opposite to what we do here in terms of the sectors. So that was quite compelling. What do these black spots behind the reflection represent then?
Oh, there I drew a wonky line outside I had to cover it up.
So no significance at all.
No, no. Well, it could be unconscious, the darkness of trying to be Switzerland.
And the gun, what are we saying about the gun there?
That's just the metaphor that Harun used right at the outset.
Right.
Our very, very low rate of informality as the smoking gun to explain why our unemployment is so high, even though our formal economy is not prohibitively regulated.
Right.
So I just took the gun and ran with it. Yeah.
Right. I'll take one brave member or audience if you have any questions really on what is here or any contributions from what you've seen. I've never seen this before, something that comes out immediately as we finish to give a huge and a beautiful summary of what has transpired. And this is just but a few, others are just at the back there for you to reflect on. Any taker that want to reflect on this, want to ask? Otherwise, we can close it here. Am I seeing a hand? No? All right, let's go to the...
I'm not sure if I'm out of the topic, but I need clarity on those two married couples there.
Oh, there you are.
What do they signify?
Oh, they are empathy and evidence. I don't know whether the man is evidence or empathy or... I don't want to have any gender stereotypes in my drawing, so I've left it ambiguous. But that was the metaphor that Godongwana used in describing what needs to happen.
Thank you. Thank you, Zizipo, right? All right. Okay, thank you so much. Once again, give it up to Carlos for beautiful work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sure. Let's get this. Someone can help us to just get this stuff off the way, and we'll close the session. Thank you so much, Carlos, for that. This is beautiful work. I feel you had a short time to present this, otherwise would have gone into details. But he's here. If you want to talk to him and get close and personal with his project right here, he'll be around for us to do so. And yeah, this is where we're going to close it for the day. Thank you so much for being a beautiful audience. Thank you for engaging us and indulging us with all the questions and the participation. We can't wait for the next 2 days with you in the room. But before we close, as Ronette will come on stage to give us some news about what's going to happen from here. Please give it a round of applause for Ronette. Yeah, let's try this. Okay, should be, there you go.
Hello. The reason the mic has to work is that I've got good news, which is I'm inviting all of you to join us for a small networking event just outside here right now when we leave the venue. There will be a cash bar. Please do treat it with respect, but you're welcome to get yourself something. And see it as a networking opportunity. I have said to somebody here earlier today, what you should be doing is that by the end of this 3 days, you have a list of 5 names of people that are not in your university, that you didn't know before you arrived here, but with whom you're going to have contact. Make this the start of your networking for your career ahead. So please, join us here for a small cocktail and a bit of networking. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ronette. Thank you. That's how we're going to do it. We're going to have a networking session. But I understand there is evaluation that needs to take place. Are you going to load an evaluation as we go to a networking session? We can complete the evaluation for the day. Let us know how we did for the day, where to improve and what not to do, and what we should continue doing. But beyond that, thank you so much, Makubo, for being a wonderful co-host. See you tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been fantastic. See you all tomorrow. Thank you.